Life as Ceremony shares personal stories, interviews with inspirational souls, and practical wisdom to help you reconnect with yourself and spirituality. Welcome back to another episode of Life as Ceremony. Today we have Trilby joining us. She is a movement guide, holistic nutritionist, and she writes a Substack called Poetry in Motion. Thank you for joining us today, Trilby.
Thank you for having me. I cannot wait to chat.
Yeah, I'm very excited that you're here. Today we're going to chat about creating a life full of connection, joy, and pleasure. We're going to talk about perceptions of spirituality and spiritual practice, and ways of living and ways of being to help you connect with yourself. Yeah. Okay. So before we get started, I thought we would begin with some this or that questions and a couple rapid fire. Are you game for that?
Let's do it.
Okay. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
I know. I've been joking. This is like a screening question before you come on the podcast.
Yeah.
Love cats too, but dogs. Love it. And Winnie is nearby.
Yeah, she's right beside me.
Oh, Winnie is Trilby's sweet little Frenchie. How old is she now?
9.
9. Amazing. Cute.
Yeah.
Pilates or strength?
Oh gosh. You know what? Strength.
Yeah, love it. Right on. Um, if you had to choose between, you can only have one, a sleep tracker or a fitness tracker.
Sleep 1000%.
Yeah. And what's your favorite sleep tracker?
Aura.
Yeah. This is
Although
not
it's the only one that I've ever tried, so
okay.
it's like a little biased.
I've tried lots. Aura's the best. This is not sponsored.
Okay.
Was I would love a free Aura ring. But no, I totally agree. I've tried a couple other watches and I feel like it's the truly the most
Oh,
accurate.
really?
Yep.
There you
Yep. Favorite season?
go. Ooh, summer.
Summer. Yeah. Trophy's glowing right now. She just got back from a trip. Where were you?
I was in Cabo in Mexico.
You look like you radiate with summer right now. And I'm excited.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm excited to chat about your trip.
Yeah.
Um, just a few more. What is your favorite thing to cook these days?
Hmm. Really into pasta,
Mhm.
but like pasta with a high protein, like creamy, delicious, really tasty, but also really nourishing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm salivating and I want the recipe to whatever you're talking about. What is the best book you've ever read or best book you've read in the past year? Like just one that comes to mind that feels impactful.
Can I give 2?
Of course.
So, it's actually very timely. I literally just finished No Bad Parts yesterday, and that book is like still marinating, but so profound. I really, really, really enjoyed reading that, especially on my solo trip. And then Sarah J. Maas, who you've maybe heard of. It's like everyone calls it fairy porn.
Yes.
I just can't get enough. I'm totally hooked.
I haven't actually read that one. It's a series, right?
She's got a couple of series. They're all, from what I gather, kind of similar, where it's like really sexual female leads who are empowered. They're like badass assassins, but also very artistic. Just
Cool.
like a really, really interesting take on that kind of like fantasy romance,
Hmm.
bit of like magic. Everyone says if you like Harry Potter, you'll like it. Like, they're very different, but having only read Harry Potter as my fiction, this is like my first time leaping away from that. It's
Yeah.
it's really like on par.
Okay. And have you read all her series or all her books? Are you?
Yeah, I've read all of the court ones,
Mhm.
which so far have been my favorite, and then I'm just kind of midway through the. I don't actually know what the series is called, but it's like the Assassin's Blade is the I think the first one maybe, and there's a few in that one.
Okay. It's the first time I've ever heard it described as fairy porn. I'm like, now I'm like, oh,
Oh, there's so much on TikTok about it.
I'm not on TikTok. Do I need to be on
Neither
TikTok?
am I. People send it to
Oh,
me.
yeah. I love it. Okay, my last rapid fire kind of question for you is, do you have a favorite quote or some words to live by? It can even just be something like
Mm.
relevant for you now that's been showing up a lot.
Yeah, actually, the first like ping that I just got was one I came across recently. It's Ram Dass. Let's hope I don't butcher it. It's you can do it like it's a great weight on you, or you can do it like it's part of the dance. And I just like I love that sentiment so much.
Can you tell us a little bit more? Like, what does it mean to you? I know you
Yeah,
wrote
I
a Substack.
feel like I did write a Substack on it.
Yeah.
I feel like it really encapsulates the idea that if there's going to be ups and downs, there's going to be things that are hard, but we can change like our attitude or how we approach those things and infuse that element of dance, which to me is like playfulness, creativity, expression, lightness. And that might not be true for everyone when they think of
Mhm.
dance, but that's my experience. So it's like the idea of like doing the laundry, you're like, or it's like, how can I make this a little bit more of a dance? And what does that look like? And it's not literally dancing, or maybe it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, just making like the mundane, the annoying parts of being human, like a little bit more light and playful.
Amazing. I
Yeah.
love it. As hearing you share that, I kind of relate it to my own language or words that resonate with me, and I feel like it really does speak to like living life as a ceremony. And
Mm,
yeah, just being present and having gratitude and moving through life in that way. And yeah, it's just interesting, yeah, to hear you talk about it as a dance was really beautiful. Thank
thanks.
you. Yeah. Okay. So Trilby texted me a little while ago, and I should look up the text and read it verbatim, but it was something like, I have zero spiritual practice in my life. I'm just realizing this. But also that like your life felt really full. It was this idea of like you didn't feel like you were missing anything, like you're feeling really, full and complete with life, connected. So you're feeling
Hmm.
really, you're not missing anything. But then you're also like, but I have zero spiritual practice. Am I missing something? You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I replied to Trilby because I view Trilby as someone with an abundance of spiritual practice in her life. And I was like, dude, you have more spiritual practice in your life than me. I was like, and referring to Trilby, I'm like, she reads books outside in the sun. That's spiritual practice. You move your body intentionally. I love this one. I see Trilby on Instagram, and it's like she pauses mid-walk to do cat cow in the grass. Like, I don't know if I know something more spiritual than that. And this is the person who's messaging me being like, I have zero spiritual practice in my life.
Mm.
So I'm really curious. Why did you think that you didn't have spiritual practice in your life? Yeah, why did you think that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I so appreciate your response. It really got me thinking. And I think ultimately what I realized was that it's like so interesting because I grew up in a very spiritual household. My dad continues to be a very devoted practitioner of like Buddhist
Mhm.
philosophy, and he goes to his Dharma once a week, and it has totally transformed his life. And he's been doing it for maybe 15 or 20 years. And then my mom had practiced Siddha yoga, which is probably unfamiliar to most people, but there was a guru. We would, I say we because I would join as like a 7 year old, chant the Bhagavad Gita. There was lots of meditation. There was an ashram in New York. It was this whole part of her life. We had photos of gurus all around our house. Ganesh, all of these Hindu gods. It was like such a part of my upbringing. But then I actually don't know what happened that caused this. And I will talk to her when I see her next, which is in a couple of days when she's visiting. But she all of a sudden just like dropped it
Mhm.
and went from being totally immersed in the culture of this, call it like tradition or spiritual path. And all of a sudden it was just like not a thing.
Mhm.
And I didn't think anything of it at the time and didn't think anything of it until very recently. And then simultaneously, my dad practicing Buddhism has always kind of made jokes about it of being like, yeah, I can't get behind this, or this. but helps me control my mind, is how he's kind of put it. But like the
Mhm.
hungry ghost, reincarnation,
Mhm.
karma, he's kind of like, yeah, not for this kid.
Mhm.
So all to say, I think that that made me somewhat skeptical of spirituality growing up, which I only just kind of figured out. And so from my say 20s onwards, I have been seeking this idea of having faith and almost like wanted to be religious because I just thought like, people like Beyonce talk about God all the time and look
Mhm.
where she's at. So maybe it would be really beneficial for me to have faith in something greater than myself. And I've
Right.
just never been able to get behind it. And there's always a skeptic, this voice in my head that's like, yeah, okay. And I've like tried diving into tarot, astrology, like Kundalini, tried that for a long time. Those are kind of like the main three that I've really tried to sink my teeth in. And every time I've been really thrown by this idea that I'm relying on this external thing
Mhm.
to determine how I should feel, how I am feeling. And it's always made me feel very disempowered, which
Mhm.
is so interesting because I look at other people and I'm like jealous. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you can pull a tarot card and like have so much belief in that card and it can like validate you. And I actually listened to a podcast last week with these two gals and they pulled cards for each other. And I couldn't stop laughing because it's like no matter what you pull, you're gonna be like, oh my God, that totally applies. That's so true. And they were like, and I'm like, no judgment, but I was just like, isn't it funny that we choose what we want to see with that stuff? But for me, I just found myself, especially the past year, just being really kind of put off by those things that I tried to incorporate but never really was able to stick with. And there was a grief with that, I think, because I think that there's something very kind of validating or identity building of being like, I wake up every morning and I do my prayers and I light
Mhm.
my candle. I have my altar. I have my sheepskin rug. I do my kriya. My hands are in the air, like all these things. And I just so badly wanted to be someone who did them, but was just like, I just don't. And I felt this like, um, yeah, I guess a conflict around that. So that's when I kind of messaged you and I was like, my God, I don't do anything quote unquote spiritual, like we were talking about, or what I was
Yeah.
defining that as. And there was a bit of a sadness there, I think.
Mhm.
But I am now realizing, I think that really to what your point when you responded to my message, that all of these things are just portals to, I believe, essentially like change our chemistry or change our state, whichever word lands more for you. For me, chemistry
Mhm.
is like something I can really lock onto as someone who loves to understand like what's actually going on in there. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. And like a Kriya for some people is this deeply spiritual experience. For me, doing sprints on the treadmill at the community center, which is like really not Instagrammable, really not a
Yeah.
vibe, or it's its own vibe. Um, the two, like doing both, give me the same feeling.
Mhm.
And in that example, it's like doing something hard and then feeling that like alchemical shift on the other side, the feeling of accomplishment, the endorphins, the dopamine. And so I think I'm now realizing that, yeah, I am getting what people get out of their spiritual practices just from different, maybe non conventionally spiritual ways. Um, and I was thinking about like when you sent that text of saying, like, oh, you have lots of spiritual practices that really made me start to reflect on like, okay, what does spirituality look like for me?
Yeah.
And as you said, it's like, oh yeah, I do a lot of things, but they're not looking to something external.
Mhm.
Which I've always been like, when people say creator or God or universe, I've never felt any kind of physical
Mhm.
like to that.
Mhm.
Um, because I've been like, oh, but it's out there. And I
Mhm.
know then I've heard people say like God, self, it's all the same. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
that I can get behind, but I still find it strange to refer to something as outside me. So
Mhm.
enter parts work and
Mhm.
reading about this idea of like the self. I'm
Mhm.
like, ah, I get it now. Like all these things that I do that make me feel connected to self,
Yes.
that's I'm like, boom, like feel it in my bones. So, and I think we can talk about what those are because a lot of them are so not conventional in the way that we think. And a lot of them would even be maybe viewed as some people as being like, oh, that's like not like a wellness practice. And yet
Mhm.
it makes me feel deeply connected to self, or put another way, I think it puts me in that like flow state, which they also
Mhm.
talk about in the parts work, which
Mhm.
I'm very lucky to experience that a lot, especially
Mhm.
through how I work. Um, so yeah, that idea of like connecting to self and that flow state, that is, I have realized where I feel spiritual.
Totally. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I don't know where to even begin, like first like can we just take a moment, like Beyonce is talking about God therefore and look where she is. Maybe I should be considering God as a part of my life. I really love that. And I'm so excited to see you open up to this idea of what spirituality looks like for you because
Hmm.
I don't know if you know this or I don't think listeners know this yet, but I actually had a big aversion to the word God and I had a really big aversion to the word spirituality, which you see in all of my writing now. And
Hmm.
and it took me a while to start writing, talking, interviewing, like sharing what I'm sharing now because of the perception of spirituality. And so I just had an aversion to the word because of the perceptions around it. And I was like, I can't talk about what I need to talk about without using that word. So let's start using it. And if anything, let's start redefining it and sharing with people what it actually means.
Hmm.
And in what you shared and what you really speak to, which I believe is the essence of spirituality and the essence of spiritual practice, it's connection. It's connection with yourself and whatever portal you want to use to get yourself there. That is spiritual practice. That is the essence of spirituality. It is not crystals and journaling and oracle cards and all of those things. It can be,
Hmm.
but it doesn't have to be. And and I I think of you when I think of this. And it is
Hmm.
like I often say, and this is what I would say to my younger self, is the most spiritual thing you could ever do is just be yourself and not
Hmm.
judge other people for doing the same. And like again, I look at you as someone with an abundance of spiritual practice, and that's because you're just being yourself. And it's
Hmm.
so evident in my eyes that you're just doing what is true to you. So it's
Hmm.
interesting that you were, with Kundalini or other things, or when you were like, I'll try astrology, and there's this grief in like, well,
Hmm.
how come I'm not feeling super connected and super spiritual? Like I'm doing all the wellness girly things. Like, why isn't
Hmm.
God coming through to me yet? What's going on?
Hmm.
And I think that because you like spirituality is walking your truth, finding your truth, and to see you doing that in such an authentic way that don't engage in a lot of conventional, quotes, what people think is spiritual.
Hmm.
I just look at that and I'm like, there's nothing more spiritual you could ever do,
Hmm.
but lean into authenticity and walking your truth. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I thinking back to our text conversation, you mentioned that life feels full and that you don't feel like you're missing anything. Have there been times in life where you felt a lack of connection, like lack of connection with yourself or yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that for a lot of my 20s, well, honestly, even like growing up, I was always labeled, diagnosed, whatever you want to call it, as being super anxious and then depressed, also diagnosed as bipolar, which like never resonated remotely with me. It was a diagnosis at the time when I was um in like the midst of an eating disorder and very malnourished. So I don't think that um I could have like functioned optimally, had proper mental health
Mhm.
until I just nourished myself more. But I got this kind of diagnosis slapped on me. So I think I have for a long time had parts of me that I've deeply feared.
Mhm.
And then because of that, my for a long time, my pursuit of feeling well
Mhm.
was to avoid not feeling bad, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because having
Mhm.
felt so low, I was almost in this constant state of vigilance of like, I don't want to feel that way again. I don't want to feel bad. I want to feel happy all the time. Don't want to ever go back there. And so it almost felt a bit neurotic in this pursuit of trying to feel well. And like I couldn't just let myself be and accept a
Mhm.
state. So whether that was PMS, whether that was just being grumpy, low blood sugar, whatever, if I started to feel myself feeling low, then I would get really frustrated with myself, scared,
Mhm.
and do anything I could to avoid it versus just like feel the emotion and let myself experience the highs and lows and actually embrace the highs and lows. So that was
Mhm.
really pivotal, that shift of avoiding discomfort and trying to be happy all the time and that being exhausting, let alone not possible,
Mhm.
turns out.
Totally.
And now embracing all facets of myself and again, coming back to this parts where it's so top of mind, but um, like letting go of the judgment
Mhm.
of myself, and then realizing that, like, oh, when I judge myself less, I judge other people less, and that feels really good. Or put another way, judging other people feels really bad. Like
Mhm.
I really don't like the feeling of when I have that instant judging tendency. So yeah, I think that now I'm in this state of being okay with not being okay. And because of that, I actually feel more okay and more full, which is the irony.
So it sounds like when there was, that lack of connection with self and you're going through, challenging times or being, sounds like mislabeled, misdiagnosed, really misunderstood, not feeling
Mm,
seen and heard. What I think I'm hearing is one of the greatest things that brought you back into connection with yourself was just acceptance.
hmm.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like the idea of loving every part of myself, even the one that's like low and sad and sensitive and defensive and like just being okay with all of it.
Totally. I wanted to talk about your skeptic part of self and like
Yeah.
love, like send them love and honor them because even when you spoke about, your upbringing and what kind of shaped your perception of spirituality and like bringing in a
Mhm.
little bit of skepticism, like
Mhm.
and correct me if this doesn't feel right, please. But to me, it sounds like this skeptic part of self allowed you to stay true to who you are in finding your own spirituality. Because if that skepticism wasn't there, you would have blindly adopted whatever anyone else was
Mm.
believing or whatever else was being shown to you when you were young. And it sounds like when I think of a skeptic, a protector, a critic, like they all serve the purpose and function of protecting us. They're actually a really valid and important part of self that we don't, we get frustrated with them, normal, but we also want to
Mhm.
honor them and remind ourselves they're really there to protect us. And just the way
Mhm.
you were sharing that, to me, it sounded like that part of you really kept you on path in terms of true to who you are, of like what spirituality really means for you rather than adopting
Mhm.
something that's not fully true for you.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Um, yeah, loving all parts. It's like I feel like it's a lot easier said than done,
Yeah.
but I do feel like when you have that first glimpse,
Hmm.
it's such like a powerful feeling and very hard to explain other than just kind of like in my experience, um, this real feeling of calm.
Yeah.
I'm like calming my inner waters when I have that feeling of just like ungripping.
Totally. When you talk about that moment of like
Mm.
really feeling it, do you remember the first time you really felt it? Or, yeah, talk about that moment for us.
Hmm. I don't know if there was a precise defining moment off the top of my head. Um, but I think in that pursuit of being diagnosed and feeling like not remotely um, in agreement with that
Mhm.
diagnosis. And then when I started to get exposure, this would have been like 2015 to the more holistic side of taking care, particularly taking care of your mental health.
Mhm.
I had made this choice. I was like, I'm going to try to do this rather than having a medication take care of fixing me.
Mhm.
What if it was about the inputs that I put into my body and I am taking care of myself and it's this active practice versus
Mhm.
just taking a pill every day
Mhm.
and just kind of being like, what if I can always go
Mhm.
back, but let's just try it. So,
Yeah.
and going through that was so like trust building
Mhm.
because I was able to see like, oh, I don't need a medication to mask my emotions.
Mhm.
I can feel them all. And then came this idea of really developing a toolkit. And maybe it's like the analytical part of me that loves this idea. And I'm so visual too. So, like, I literally have in my brain is like this shelf of like all my things.
Yeah.
So that if
Yeah.
I am feeling a certain way, I can be like, okay, tool A,
Mm.
tool B. And I feel really in control, which I'd love to be in.
Yeah.
But also like safe in that like it's me holding me as
Mm.
opposed to relying on something external.
Mhm.
So I think it was a very gradual, but kind of I think the precipice was going off of that medication and realizing being like, oh, I'm okay, and
Yeah.
I'm not like I'm not having these crazy spirals, and I'll have a couple of days of maybe feeling like crap, and then I
Mhm.
know and trust that I can always pull myself out of it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of been like the journey now is just like I keep building that toolkit and it's changed and evolved so much. And part of that has been like, ooh, Kundalini, tarot, nope. And then, like trying it on, seeing, and then being like, not for me. And I
Yeah.
feel like now I'm in this really nice place of some of it is call it wellness
Mhm.
the way that we know it, but a lot of it is not. And I think that
Mhm.
that feels really good. There isn't that kind of rigidity that
Yes.
maybe my toolkit once looked like, and now it's a lot more kind of chill.
Yes. I wanna ask you about the toolkit, but also just,
Mhm.
can I ask how old were you at the time when you went off that medication? Just
I think I would have been 24 or 25.
okay.
But all my life, I mean, not all my life, from the age of 12 until then, I was always on a medication
Oh, wow.
to
Okay.
manage either anxiety or depression
Mhm.
or the bipolar. And
Mhm.
I don't hold any blame for anyone
Mhm.
in that. I think it was that my parents, or my background, say, on both sides, is like riddled with depression, like really heavy
Mhm.
stuff. So for them, they were just like, oh, that's who we are, the Gooches. We've
Yep.
got kind of funky chemistry and we
Yeah.
self medicate. And it was
Yeah.
so embraced, so accepted.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I understand why that was the path that was kind of paved for me.
Mhm.
But I'm also very glad that at the age that I did, I made that decision to take a different route,
Mhm.
which may have not worked out, and that's fine. But I'm really glad that I just had that ping of kind of being like, huh, let's try this on and see.
See how it goes, and here you
Yeah,
are are you almost a decade later?
I
How
guess so. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, so it sounds like that being a pivotal moment, and then since then, gradually, I don't know, like the toolkit, these shelves,
Hmm.
were maybe more sparse at the time, and then it's been
Hmm.
total like inventory of like what works, what doesn't. And it sounds like you're at a place in your journey where you've also had a ton of things on the shelf that you've also since replaced with
Yes.
because you've had, yeah, but I mean, that research is important. And
Hmm.
speaking to that idea of research, I think, folks listening to this, and I know myself currently, but even especially when I was younger, where I was trying, like I needed to seek connection and I didn't know where to begin and I felt really lost. And as
Hmm.
much as spirituality is really about following your truth and there's no good, bad, right, or wrong, and it really is about following your truth, at the same time, I also think it's really helpful for people on their journey to hear what is working for other people. Again, not to blindly adopt it, but to like you did with astrology or this or that. Like try it on. What resonates, what doesn't, what speaks to your soul, what doesn't. And
Hmm.
so tell us about the toolkit, these shelves, and tell us a bit about what's on there now and how it helps you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the foundation, and this came to me a while ago. I speak in class a lot about the physical body, the emotional body, and the energetic body as
Mhm.
being these different parts that we can tap into in, for example, like a movement class. People tend to hone in on the physical, but I always like to bring attention to the other parts that can be affected as
Mhm.
well. And I believe, at least right now, that I think that tending to the mental and the physical bodies is a prerequisite to be able to explore, raise the vibration, whatever language you want for your energetic body.
Mhm.
So I think that like my number one tools, and will probably always be this way, is like mental tools, which to me is like, oh yeah.
Yeah, wait, sorry, before you tell us how to access that energetic body or what is the portal that's working for you, are you able to
Mhm.
tell listeners what you mean by energetic body? I think we know what it
Yes.
means to be like in the physical or like in our emotions, but what do you mean when you say energetic body?
Yeah, I think, you know what, the best way I could describe it, this is like a little bit of a tangent story, but I think it's very relevant.
Mhm.
At the resort, was it yesterday? Yesterday morning, I was getting my breakfast at the buffet. This couple came up to me and they were like, "Sorry to interrupt you. We've seen you enjoying your breakfast in the sun. We saw you at dinner last night. And we just have to say, you give off this energy of like health and vitality. And we'd love to sit down with you and just like get to know you."
I
And
love
I was just like, what? Like, number one, does I can't think of higher praise or compliment.
that.
And then it was quite funny because the gentleman right away was like, "And you're fit, your body, you are so in shape, you're so fit." And then the wife was like, "It's not about that. It's not about that." Just like hilarious because
I
part of me
love
was like, "Oh, this is getting okay."
yeah.
But yeah, so to me, like that is a good example of someone's energetic body. They
Mhm.
were drawn to how I carried myself, how I was enjoying my coffee, whatever energy that's unseen but felt that was radiating from me, that is what they were drawn to. So I think it's like the energetic body is how we make people feel,
Mhm.
because being pretty doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
change how someone feels, but how you emote, how you converse, your presence, that can change how someone feels or how you can hold space, things like that. And then I would also say it's kind of that idea of those feelings that sometimes are fleeting, sometimes depends on the situation, but where you feel um like I like to refer to like a heightened frequency.
Mhm.
So someone might get that after meditation, after dancing, after being in nature, after
Mhm.
chanting. So all these spiritual practices. I get it sitting having a coffee in the sun. Like I
Mhm.
truly just feel this like buzz of, call it presence, call it high vibration, this
Mhm.
uplifted quality. So
Mhm.
that's kind of, and then I guess on the flip side, your energetic body could feel really like heavy, really depleted, really like burnt out, like you um an efforting quality. I would
Mhm.
say is perhaps like the opposite, or that's at least my experience, where I
Mhm.
almost feel like these different practices like brighten me up and then I can
Mhm.
feel dim or kind of like dull.
Yes. Yeah, like translating some of this into some of the language or words that I'm like, I know my
Like a
brain,
light
like,
bulb.
yeah, my brain's like exploding right now because to me, like what you're talking about is like being in connection, not only with self, but with spirit and like being in
Mm,
connection with our soul. And the way you talk about, that energetic body, like one of the best words I can use to describe this connection with spirit is like you're in your essence, like you're in your soul's
mm,
essence, like you're living a life as close and true to you as possible and carrying yourself in that way. And I do
mm,
believe it is this unseen, unfelt thing where someone radiates, and I believe it's just because they're like moving closer and closer to who they are. And even though we
mm,
talk about these external things that we connect with that make us feel close to ourselves, and this is spirituality, it's also so much greater than that, like where you can't define it in a tangible thing that is unique or authentic to Trilby. It's
mm,
just
mm,
her energy because she's in touch with who she is at a soul level.
Mm-hmm.
And well, there was something. Oh yeah, okay, I have this like belief. I'm kind of working through. It's like a half-baked thought at this point. But
Mm-hmm.
I really believe like people who are drawn to people who are in their essence, who are like
Mm.
living that truth piece in their that energetic body, the same way these people were really drawn to you. I think people are drawn to people who are in that essence of their soul because it's reminding them that they can be too. And
Yeah.
it's like speaking to their soul, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Mm-hmm.
with mindfulness or stuff, like I often think it's like mundane and not revolutionary. But the
Mm.
reason why it feels revolutionary to people sometimes is because it's like speaking to this deeper part of like
Mm.
we're just reflecting back to each other what we already inherently know.
Mm.
Anyways,
Totally.
working through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And it also kind of makes me think of in class, I'll quite often check in with people saying, is your reality matching your experience?
Mhm.
So if your experience is you're in a glute bridge, what is your reality? Are you in the glute bridge or are you like making your grocery list? And
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything wrong with
totally.
necessarily reality not matching experience, but I think that feeling of like another word I would think of is like contentment is
Hmm.
when your reality is matching your experience and you're like really like content about that.
Totally.
So if you're on a flight and there's a child crying, your
Hmm.
reality might be matching your experience, but you might not be in like a place of comfort. So I think even in those situations, it's then in our control. Like, how can I make this a more pleasant, easeful time? And
Hmm.
and that's kind of I think what it's all about is it's like pulling these levers to create contentment for ourselves
Hmm.
and keep our energy grounded, keep our inner waters calm, whatever metaphor you want to come to. But the idea that it doesn't just like happen. Like, I
Hmm.
think that we do have to craft it. I don't want to say work at it, but craft the conditions. And I think
Absolutely.
that's really where like the tools come. But like this couple saying to me, I'm like, I felt like saying, I was like, it's a full-time job. And it's a great one at that. Like
Yeah,
it's great, but it's I think that it's not necessarily like a je ne sais quoi, you know, like
totally.
there is efforting behind that.
Oh, yeah. I have a thought to share around like I hear you like it's a full-time job. I also think that because of the world we live in that aims to keep us a bit disempowered or disconnected from ourselves. I think
Mm,
that plays into why sometimes it does feel like a job and a lot of
totally.
work. Like even just think about, and I know you and I currently we don't work Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I know for myself personally, like that rhythm does not work
Mm,
for me, and for some people it does, and that's why I think
hmm.
your truth is so important. Um, but yeah, it's a full-time job also, and so I guess I want to offer that because I want people to also know, and even for yourself, that it's a full-time job. It's like to take a little of that responsibility off yourself. We can be accountable and responsible, and we can also
Hmm.
acknowledge our world makes it hard on us to
For
live that.
sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I know we've talked a lot about this, but I want to bring it back to the shelves and what's on there because I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you can give us like a quick list of if someone were to be like, "Well, Trilby, like what should I do?" Like I'm seeking
Mm,
joy, connection and pleasure. And even though their answer will be unique to them,
hmm.
what are like a couple things you would recommend or a couple things that are on your shelf right now that you're like, I do this, that, and da da da.
Yeah. I would say part of the answer is extremely unglamorous. And I think it's like the stuff that we hear and we're like, ah, really? Like, I really hoped it would be like this herb or this tincture. And I just pop it and
Yeah,
then I'm
totally.
vibrating higher. But like, I would say for me at least, like sleep, like
Yeah,
protein, eating 30 to 35 different types of fiber a week,
yeah,
moving my body every day, sweating every day, that works for me. Um, and with the food piece too, I think it's eating slowly,
mm,
which I think is like so simple and maybe the hardest thing in the world, like to just
totally.
chew your food
Yeah.
it's so unbelievably challenging.
Yeah.
So like those kind of mundane things I believe are totally necessary and integral for me to then be able to operate from that place of like, what would bring me joy today? Like,
Mhm.
can I actually enjoy pleasure? Can I? So
Mhm.
there's that piece. I would say like the kind of like very boring, simple, but tried and true wellness practices. Um, I think that therapy, whether
Mhm.
that is seeing a therapist, couples therapist, reading a book on a
Mhm.
way to get to know yourself, whatever that tool is, I think that that is so, so empowering and powerful. And that will always be a part of my life. I think like therapy has always been a part of my life since I
Mhm.
was probably even younger than 12, actually. So yeah, therapy, taking care through like nutrition, sleep, so like that boring, mundane stuff.
Yeah.
But then I think when you have that commitment to those practices that are yeah, kind of like annoying. And again, like they're not like they're not shiny, sparkly, they're not
Mhm.
like do this one thing.
Mhm.
That kind of like fix it model of wellness that we get really hooked into, especially on Instagram. It's like this product, that product, this Kriya, this
Yeah.
program. Um, and then because I have those conditions set, then I can partake in these things that like bring me a lot of joy and pleasure that are not remotely tied to health or wellness. So
Mhm.
like you know that Kyle and I do date night every Friday night, and I swear that is probably the most spiritual part of my week
Totally.
because it is so novel. We don't eat like that most days.
Yeah.
It's this time where we put our phones away for the night. We are so present eating our food, and it just such a moment of connection and pleasure. So that to me is like chef's kiss spiritual practice.
To
And honestly, even things like right now, what brings me so much joy and pleasure is watching a movie or a TV show with Kyle and Winnie after dinner.
yeah.
And so many people could say, like, oh, the blue light, oh, you're stimulating your brain, oh, you should be reading, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, maybe, but this, like, my restorative time on my aura ring when I'm doing that, it kind of validates that I am in this state of like presence, calm. I'm getting that tactile feedback from Winnie, from Kyle. And it's just like such a source of joy. But I think that basically what I'm trying to say with that is I think it's really about taking inventory of like what gives you that feeling of like, that little like, that feeling, that sparkle, whatever you want to call it. And if that is something that's deemed not healthy or whatever, like that's okay.
Mhm.
But I also would say that it's important to have that foundation
Mhm.
but behind it. So I think that that's kind of like the thing that people don't really want to hear. But like, in order for me to really enjoy a TV show every night, to enjoy Nook, it's because 80% of the time I am taking such good care of my body and prioritizing these things and doing the boring stuff, eating the vegetables, the fiber, whatever, so that those moments can really feel like fully embodied and joyful. I'm not feeling like shit the next day. My digestion's fine. I can handle the bit of blue light, like all these things. Um, and then I guess when it comes to like if I were to help someone kind of with that too, another way that I really like to think, and I wrote a Substack about this, is how can we romanticize our life? And
Yeah.
that to me, like, is something that I think about every day when I wake up. And um, I don't even want to say that it's a privilege that I have a lot of free time because I've actively chosen that.
Mhm.
And I've had a life where I didn't have a lot of free time and I worked 9 to 6. And same with you, it did not work for me. So I have actively prioritized freedom in my day to be able to pursue these things and to be able to romanticize my life. That said, I think you can do it no matter what your schedule is, just all your perception and what that means for you. So yeah, for me, it's like going for a walk, having a coffee in the sun, like that is such an important part of my day. And it's so simple. It costs like 3.50, which even that I'm like, what? It used to be $1.15. But yeah, like I think finding those little simple pleasures, or some people call them glimmers,
Yeah.
And just like injecting them in your day is just, it really elevates the day. And it's kind of like this idea of how, and having just come back from vacation, like how do we approach a vacation? What is our mindset? How are we planning our day? How are we noticing things, taking in our surroundings more, being in a state of awe, more present, whatever? Like we can do that in our own backyard, in our
Mhm.
own home, amidst the chaos of scheduling, work, all these things. I think is just like stepping back and being like, what do I want? Like
Mhm.
what would actually light me up? And it's going to be different from the person beside you. Your for you might be different than for me.
Mhm.
But I think again, it comes back to connecting to yourself and asking yourself those questions. And for some people, that might be like mood boarding or like a Pinterest
Mhm.
board. If they're very visual, it might be journaling it out, writing out like these are 7 things I want to do this week that will like fill my cup or bring me joy or pleasure. And committing to that and prioritizing it the same way you
Mhm.
would the other kind of like wellnessy tools that are a bit more boring, mundane, the ones that I keep saying that because like they're not glamorous and people resist that so much. Have like when I work with clients, like they don't want to hear it.
Mhm.
But having prioritized them, I can say like they're my most important tools and they kind of give me like the scaffolding to be able to do all those pleasure inducing things.
Totally. A couple of things, and on that note of like the mundane,
Mm.
so much of mindfulness is like noticing the magnificence in the mundane, and
Mm.
I think you already know this, but like one of the reasons why I genuinely love your Substack so much is, well, in my opinion, it is glamorous. Don't worry, but I love your, I love your honesty and simplicity. I think there's a lot of fluff out there, and even like, yeah, like I want the simple workouts. I want the simple recipes. I want the simple things, and these are the things that actually work. And there's so much, I just wrote a little thing about like there's so much value in repeating certain things. And
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly looking for new, more. And it's like, what about the value and what's worth repeating? And I personally am one of those people where I also find value in paying for it or investing in it.
Mm.
I want and I need someone to tell me that or share that with me. It's kind of like how we go to the same yoga class over and over again. It's the same sequence,
Yeah.
similar playlist or music, but we go and we value it and we pay every time. And yeah, for in-person experiences, totally like your in-person community, etc. But even
Mm-hmm.
with things like someone's Substack, like when I'm invested in it, I'm going to read it regularly. And I'm not like, oh, we did squats last workout. Like this isn't new. I'm like, oh, great. Like I love seeing what I like repeated. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
perfect. And we need
Mm-hmm.
that reminder. So that's a genuinely like why I follow you or talk about you with, I
Mm.
know we're friends, but talk about you with my friends because I'm like, it's just so simple and easy to follow, and it like really works.
Mm.
I love that. And then I also just wanted to comment on your date night with Kyle because I,
Everyone knows about it.
it's great. I know if you see this hot couple in Kitsilano just roaming around Friday night early dinner because they have an early bedtime.
Oh
That's
yeah.
Trilby and Kyle. But to me, like that is what I would call a date ceremony of
Mm.
phones away. You even use the words presence and connection, and I'm like, that
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what ceremony is.
Mm-hmm.
So on actually this ties in perfectly to my last couple questions for you because I want to talk about your recent trip to
Mm.
Cabo and I guess I want to talk about it in relation to like ceremony or like silent retreats or yeah, silent retreats or ceremony because similar to spirituality, people have a perception of that word, already ideas
Yeah.
and visions are, popping into your mind of like what you think a ceremony is or what you think a silent retreat is. And again, Trilby being Trilby, authentic and true to who she is, go takes herself on an all-inclusive trip by herself. She's giggling right now. And I think again, that is spiritual, that is ceremony, and it doesn't have to be what yeah, what people think it is. I think some people are out there like looking for a retreat, looking for connection, looking to go to a ceremony because they think they need that. And you're solo all inclusive. I'm like, Trilby just did it in her own and authentic way. And
Mm,
it's super cool. So I want you to tell people about it and tell us what
yeah.
you did, everything. Yeah, go.
Yeah. So I guess last March, I did my first solo all-inclusive trip. It was like 4 nights, 5 days, because normally every March for the past few years, we go to Kyle's parents' place in Mexico. And they didn't go that year. So I was like, oh shit, like my annual Mexico trip, my chance to get vitamin D, sunshine vacation has been taken away from me. And I kind of moped for a day, and then I was like, I'm just gonna go. Like, and obviously, well, maybe not obviously, my parents were like, you're not going to Mexico alone. And I was like, you know what? Okay, all inclusive. I'll be in a resort, very safe. I won't leave the resort, blah, blah, blah. And so I went to Cancun last year and was truly like blown away, purely, I think, because I set the bar so low. Of just thinking, like, when I would tell people I'm going to all inclusive, they're like, oh, like interesting. Like, what's the food like there? Like, what's the rate? Have you seen photos? Like, a lot of kind of skepticism. And I also then started diving a little bit deeper before I went and was looking at the photos and reviews. And I was like, oh God, what have I done? I'm going to cancel it. This is going to like so not be my vibe. But then I was like, you know what? Make it your vibe. Like,
Yes.
and like, let that be a playful experience. So I did. And yeah, I went to Cancun last year, had a fabulous time, talked to no one, loved the food. Like, just I'm pretty simple and like easy to please when it comes to food, but there's something so amazing about having just like everything there when you want it at any point in time without having to put forth any effort. And I think also I really noticed in both of my trips that, again, it kind of comes back to this like 80-20 principle, which I'm very passionate about, that because I eat so well, take such good care of my body self
Mhm.
80% of the time, that when I'm at an all inclusive, like I'm getting the French toast, I'm getting the pancakes, I'm getting the sausages baked, like all I'm doing it all because I have the conditions to handle it.
Mhm.
Whereas I noticed a lot of people were just kind of like nibbling at like a fruit salad. And I'm like, maybe their stomach's off. Maybe that's all they want. Maybe it's a preference, whatever. But I also know there's a time in my life where I would have gone there, seen that food and been like, oh my God, no, I need to eat really clean for this
Mhm.
trip. I need to make it a detox
Yeah.
from my life in, call it Toronto.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just have a lot of fun when I go there by myself, and I very much enjoy my own company. But I will also say that it is an interesting experience when you're on your own. I know you've done silent retreats. I'm not sure if this has been your experience, but it's almost as exhausting as being with people all the time, because my mental dialogue is like constant.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily bad. It could be really positive, taking in my surroundings, enjoying the food, but it's like it's just as active in there as it would be if I was conversing with other people. And so for this trip, I think having the no bad parts part to read was really, really nice, because I would go on a beach walk and practice those meditations and talk to my parts. And
Nice.
so it felt like a kind of more like grounded version than being like, what should I plan for class next week? When will I do this again? And like going into like life planning mode, which again brings me joy, but it can be very stimulating. So yeah, basically I go there to unplug, to be less like expressive and emotive to other people, because teaching is so demanding of that. And hence why it's like an unofficial silent retreat. And I'm also just like such a sun worshiper. Like the
Fun.
feeling of sun on my skin is just it's the best. So that's a huge part of why I do it as well. Not necessarily to like get my vitamin D, but it just feels so good. But I think with these trips, what I've really learned, it's like it's what you make it.
Mhm.
And I wrote a Substack on this on Sunday about like I could do all inclusive in a way that most people think of all inclusive, and I'd be pretty miserable.
Mhm.
Or I kind of like assess the conditions and then be like, how do I make this work for me? And
Mhm.
so that does take maybe a little bit more planning, or deciding like where I'm going to situate myself so I'm not close to the speakers, or maybe it means like pulling my deck chair further away somewhere, like all of these little steps and things that I do to set the conditions that I'm like, yes, this is like how I want it to be,
Mhm.
which I think for a long time I kind of would call like control freak behavior. And now I realize it's like, no, it's really empowering to know what you want and then
Yeah,
like make that work for you.
totally.
So even like going for the buffet breakfast, like I was so particular. I was like, I am getting the seat in the sun that's over here. I'm going early for it because I don't want to be inside with all the crowds and
Mhm.
like people who are just like, yeah, maybe giving off some obnoxious energy. And so, yeah, I think that I really embrace that part of myself now, which I have had struggles with, like the need for control. But in
Yeah,
this sense, it's like it is a bit of a prerequisite, I think, to make an all inclusive feel like a spiritual retreat. Uh,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, well, what I hear in that is not you trying to control something you can't control. I hear you waking up early to get the spot in the sun to meet your needs. You know, and
Yeah,
and I think
totally.
and I think that's the part that's empowering is when we recognize that we do, the word control can feel like charged, I guess.
Mm,
And it's like it's empowering to like have the autonomy to meet your needs. And
hmm.
so, and that's very different from trying to control something we can't control.
Hmm.
So what I heard in that was just like being aware of what you need, taking the necessary steps to meet your needs, which is
Hmm.
awesome. Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
write that down later as I need to do
Well,
that.
and it's funny because I mean, maybe not everyone is as sensitive to their surroundings as I am, but making those little shifts, or even like, even how I plate my food, like that makes a difference to my level of joy and pleasure. Um, and I guess I really dial in like on those subtleties, like whether the sun is on me or not, when I'm having my coffee, like things like that, I really prioritize. And I don't know if I'm an anomaly in that or if most people are that aware, but for me, that works to be able
Mhm.
to really like fine tune and yeah, like craft my experience, and then I can kind of be anywhere and
Yeah.
enjoy it in my own way, I guess.
Yeah. I think you said something really important that anyone who feels sensitive or receptive needs to hear because sensitivity and receptivity is not quote unquote a bad thing, right? Like there isn't this
Mm,
good, bad, right or wrong. And I think the way in which your way of living and being to meet your needs is like I think as someone who identifies as sensitive or receptive, especially like in my early years or growing up, it can made out to be like you're needy or high maintenance.
totally.
And it's like and this is actually like the way that I am. I'm not choosing to be
Hmm.
receptive to, I like stimulation, For example, I'm currently living in Whistler, probably not forever, enjoying every minute while I'm here, but for me, the city is really challenging for someone who's sensitive and receptive. Like for me, that is stimulus that isn't really working for me and it's
Mm,
really challenging and it doesn't make me bad or wrong or too sensitive or high maintenance. And so the way in which you are so effortlessly talking about your level of sensitivity and your awareness about
mm,
what brings you joy and pleasure and being empowered to meet your needs of like even when we talk about parts work today like quote unquote that sensitive part it's like
hmm,
yeah that part's so important and valid and worthy and what does she need today well oh
mm,
she needs a spot in the sun and she needs to be particular about her plate which is so
hmm,
fair and just hearing you talk about it I feel like it's giving me permission to to
mm,
to be myself, and I just yeah, hope listeners feel the same way.
mm. That's so nice the way you put that, because yeah, I grew up being told I was sensitive and I was always ashamed of that.
Mhm.
Like it was like, oh, you're sensitive, like you can't listen to the fireworks because you have to plug your ears, or like, oh, you're sensitive, you can't do
Yeah,
this. And it felt like a vulnerability.
totally.
Which again, even the way that I said that, like vulnerability is actually a beautiful thing. But
Yeah.
when I growing up, I felt like I didn't want to be the sensitive person, but it's a nice reframe that the things like being a sensitive person allows me to, yeah, take in those subtleties like I was just describing.
Totally. And it's an honoring of who you are rather than trying to change it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, final question here. Um,
Hmm.
I'm debating between two questions. I might have two questions. I might have to ask them both.
Okay.
Yeah, I have two questions. I need to ask them both. Now I'm deciding which order. Okay. What is like the greatest thing you learned about yourself through this all inclusive? Or
Mm.
what's the greatest thing you've learned about yourself this year? However you want to take that question. I just want to hear yeah, something you've learned about yourself.
Mm. I think, well, for both this year and then also really like became poignant on the trip, um, is it the parts of me that I have maybe had shame around also in the same breath, like allow me to experience the joy and the pleasure and the things that I like so enjoy. A
Mhm.
really good example of that is I was thinking about myself on the trip. Like I was working out 2 or 3 times a day. And I even the word working out so does not resonate with me, but
Mhm.
moving my body.
Mhm.
And it might have been like lifting weights. Maybe it was
Mhm.
running along the beach. Maybe it was doing yoga on the balcony. And there is a part of me that is like, oh my God, you're such a control freak around
Mhm.
needing to exercise and this old story, old narrative of how it
Mhm.
used to be, where I would move my body to make my body look a certain way and even
Mhm.
act as some sort of punishment. And I think I really realized I felt it this year for sure, but also this trip that like that part of being organized and dialed and making time for exercise
Mhm.
allows me to feel so good in my body and to
Mhm.
have so much energy and to move pain free and all to teach the way I do to have that endurance and capacity. And I really like hit me. I was like, oh, this is actually like a massive gesture of self care and self
Yeah.
love. It's not punishment, but it was. And it's interesting how these tendencies or habits or things that we have can evolve that
Yeah.
maybe we're not self-serving, but can become self-serving just based on our attitude and
Yeah.
approach to them. So I think of that even with eating well. Like my intentions of eating well at one time were not necessarily coming from a kind place. And now I like revere my body and it's like my home,
Mm.
this like abode that I just want
Yeah.
to take care of and I'm in like constant awe of. And that means fueling it with healthy food. But every now and then, like I'll have a salad instead of or whatever, I'm like, oh my God, is this like your eating disorder coming out? And it's
Mhm.
like, no, it's
No.
actually not. But like there's a part of me that has this kind of old narrative tied
Yeah.
to these things. So I think that was like pretty interesting and very cool to witness. And it's kind of comes back to the idea of no bad parts, of like that part that likes to control their day and their schedule and make every hour count. I could totally be like, you need to chill and
Yeah.
just lay on the beach. And, but it's like, that doesn't work for me. I love having a packed day,
Yeah.
even at a resort. And if that is bringing me true, authentic joy and pleasure, then like, great.
Yeah. Amazing. I think in your answer you just shared with us, it's riddled with really helpful reframes, I think, for all of us to help
Mm,
us just like honor who we are. So thank you.
mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
guess my last question, I feel like you have answered this throughout the podcast. So maybe just if there's anything you want to add, but I guess it's
Mm-hmm.
why? Like why live this way? Why do what you do? Why put
Mm,
so much emphasis and effort? You know, it's a full-time job that you love, that you take really
mm,
seriously. Why? What's, like
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good question. For whatever reason, all my life have been hyper aware of death and how short it is. and it doesn't scare me. Like death is actually not something that I'm like death. And I actually think it's because having older parents
Hmm.
from until the age that I comprehended they were older and they would probably die before other people's parents.
Can you just share with listeners how old your parents are?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm 33, my dad is 83, and my mom is 77.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that I have always been very aware of the fact that they were going to die soon. I mean, when you're little, you think 80 is like ancient. So I was like, I don't even know if my dad will be around when I'm 30. So I think it instilled this idea of like really making time count.
Mhm.
And then that has kind of translated into my own life. And I'm just like so aware that today could be my last day.
Mhm.
Like I think about it constantly, and I don't know. I think that for some people that might be thought of as kind of morbid, or I know there's like a stoic practice or meditation where you wake up and you it's either like you picture your funeral or you just say like what would I do if today was my last day? I think
Yeah.
that's is more. And so that's just kind of ingrained in me. So because of that, I'm like I want to feel good
Yeah.
and I want to enjoy this time, however much time I have. I also think Kyle and I talk a lot about this that when you feel good mentally and physically, you become healthily attached to that.
Mhm.
So versus I think if you and I'm this is an assumption I'm making, if you are in chronic pain or you don't feel good in your body, if you have conditions or things where you get kind of used to feeling a certain way, maybe there is less of a motivation to feel that way versus when you're feeling healthy and like pain free, knock on wood,
Mhm.
and like this abundance of energy, all these things, you're like, I want to hold on to this. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it as well. It's like when you feel how good it can be, you want to maintain that. And I would also say because I have again, knock on wood, not felt that like uh really low like deep depression, eating disorder, like that early 20s. I haven't felt that in a
Mhm.
long time. I think that I there is probably like a healthy dose of fear of like I don't want to go back there. And I
Mhm.
think that and I we kind of villainize fear as and I also think we kind of villainize death, but I think that it is a healthy fear to have as a motivator of like, yeah, I don't want to be there because I know how bad I felt. So like I'm committed to these tools and these practices, I think.
Yeah, beautiful. I really love what you shared at the end there too about how we villainize death or fear, and I'm really grateful that you're like so open in chatting about it because I think it's
Mm,
really important. And when it comes to fear, similar to your skeptic part of self, like we need to stop villainizing any emotion, period, because it is
hmm.
all of them, carry with them their own wisdom, serve purpose. And, in terms of that healthy dose of fear, it's like fear is also what keeps us safe, right? In terms of
Yeah.
noticing that. And opposites allow us to experience the wholeness of life. And I'll share with you,
Hmm.
and there's no right or wrong opposite in my opinion. The opposite of fear is faith, and I wanted to share that with you because at the
Mm,
beginning you had mentioned faith. And it's like it's not about being like in life in one or the other, because there's going to be both, and opposites allow us to experience wholeness the same way death and life, right?
mhm.
It's all part of it. And isn't it interesting how in our society we also want to only feel certain ways or only want to talk about life, not death, when it's this
Totally.
whole experience. So thank you for sharing
Hmm.
all about death, and also just how it allows you to live life so full and so connected. And
Mm.
yeah, thank you so much for today's really inspiring conversation.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. So I love talking to you, whether it's for a podcast or just sitting at turf.
Totally. And I know there will be many more coffees at Turf. And also, I'm sure you'll be back here if you want to be, because
Oh,
there's.
I would love to. Absolutely.
So if anyone listening to this feels really inspired, just shoot me a DM or a text. What do you want me to ask Trilby next? Because I feel like she's coming back. So thank you so much again for your time, Trilby. We are so grateful.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sam.